Breaking tonight, Canada's approach to major energy projects just shifted permanently. Indigenous communities aren't obstacles, they're partners. And Beijing is watching. Everyone believed major resource development and Indigenous sovereignty were fundamentally incompatible. Energy executives assumed consultation meant delay. International investors expected legal challenges would kill Canadian projects. Wall Street analysts predicted Canada would never compete with American LNG exports because Indigenous rights would slow everything down. They were all utterly incorrect. Prince Rupert, British Columbia. Tuesday morning, Prime Minister Mark Carney isn't in Ottawa preparing briefing books for his high-stakes China trip. He's not in Vancouver meeting with business leaders about Asian trade. He's standing in the northern BC, meeting face-to-face with coastal First Nations before his plane even leaves Canadian airspace. Translation: Carney just showed Beijing exactly what reliable partnership looks like. And what happened next reveals why Canada's energy strategy is reshaping global LNG markets, while American chaos drives Asian buyers towards stability. Here's what the conventional analysis got wrong about this Prince Rupert stop. Most observers saw a routine political photo opportunity. Prime Minister makes symbolic gesture toward reconciliation before important international trip. Standard protocol, expected theater. But look at the actual delegation Carney brought north. Energy and Natural Resources Minister Tim Hodgson, Housing Minister Gregor Robertson, Liberal MP Wade Grant. This isn't ceremonial window dressing. This is the Economic Cabinet traveling to Indigenous territory to discuss partnership on projects worth billions. Dear viewers, between now and Carney's departure for his 9-day trip across China, Qatar, and Switzerland, something extraordinary is happening in Canadian resource development. The old extraction model died. The partnership model emerged. And Indigenous communities, sovereign and strategic, became the partners every serious energy developer started calling first. The agenda Ottawa confirmed tells you everything. Marine conservation, ocean protection, Indigenous-led environmental stewardship. And here's the critical phrase buried in the official statement: how the federal government and Indigenous communities can ensure projects are built sustainably and in partnership. That word, partnership, not consultation, not accommodation, partnership. March 2025, Carney takes office with a mandate to rebuild Canadian sovereignty. The playbook Washington expected: aggressive resource extraction to compete with American production. The playbook Carney actually deployed: Indigenous partnership as competitive advantage. Now let's talk about what's actually being built in northern BC. While American LNG projects face regulatory chaos, the Ksi Lisims liquefied natural gas facility, 12 million tons of LNG annually, direct pipeline to Asian markets, federal government fast-track approval, BC provincial priority status. And here's what separates this from every failed Canadian energy project of the past decade, developed in full partnership with the Nisga'a Nation. Not despite Indigenous involvement, because of Indigenous involvement. Everyone believed Indigenous partnership would slow project timelines. They assumed consultation meant endless delays. They predicted legal challenges would make Canadian LNG uncompetitive. Watch what actually happened. The Nisga'a Nation brought land certainty, legal clarity, community support, environmental credibility, and most importantly, for Asian buyers worried about supply reliability, governance stability that American projects can't match. When Carney meets with Chinese officials this week, he's not selling them Canadian natural gas. He's selling them something far more valuable: supply chain reliability backed by Indigenous partnership that guarantees projects actually get built. Translation: while American LNG export facilities face lawsuits, regulatory reversals, and political volatility every election cycle, Canadian facilities backed by Indigenous nations offer contract certainty that's worth premium pricing. Now watch how smart Carney's playing this. Coastal First Nations, 9 communities along this coastline, they've drawn a line. That oil pipeline to BC's north coast everyone keeps talking about will never happen. Direct quote. Zero ambiguity. The conventional political response: fight them. Override their concerns, push the pipeline through anyway, citing national economic interest. Carney's actual response: listen, then build the LNG facility they support instead. Look at the Memorandum of Understanding Carney signed with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith in late November. Yes, it includes language about a potential pipeline route to the north coast. Yes, it discusses lifting the oil tanker ban. But notice what Carney actually prioritized for federal fast-track approval. The Ksi Lisims LNG facility, the project with Indigenous partnership, the export terminal that doesn't require fighting coastal First Nations in court for the next decade. This isn't capitulation. This is strategic choice. Natural gas exports to Asia generate the revenue Alberta needs. LNG facilities create the jobs BC wants. Indigenous communities get partnership instead of extraction. And Canada positions itself as the reliable energy supplier while American projects drown in litigation. Everyone wins except the oil pipeline that coastal First Nations already told you will never get built. Now let's discuss why Carney is making this northern BC stop before his China trip instead of after. Asia's energy demand is growing faster than any other region globally. China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. They all need stable LNG imports. And right now, their options are limited and getting worse. Russian supply, sanctioned and politically toxic after Ukraine. American LNG, facing domestic political battles and regulatory uncertainty. Australian exports, already committed to existing contracts. Middle Eastern gas, geographically distant with long shipping routes. Canadian LNG from BC's north coast, shorter Pacific routes. Indigenous partnership guaranteeing project completion. Political stability that survives election cycles. Environmental standards that meet international benchmarks. When Carney sits down with Chinese officials, he's not just offering them natural gas molecules. He's offering them something American suppliers can't. Predictability. Think about what Beijing has watched happen to American energy policy over the past decade. One administration approves export facilities. Next administration reviews them. Environmental groups sue. State governments intervene. Projects get delayed, canceled, restarted, delayed again. Now contrast that with Canada's Ksi Lisims model, federal government commitment, provincial government support, Indigenous Nation partnership, legal certainty, because the communities who actually live on the land are equity partners in the project. From Beijing's perspective, which supplier looks more reliable for a 20-year LNG contract? Look at what Carney's doing this week. Tuesday morning, he's face-to-face with coastal First Nations in Prince Rupert. Wednesday, he's wheels up to Beijing. Then Qatar. Then Davos for the World Economic Forum. 3 audiences. 1 message. Canada has solved the puzzle that's breaking American resource development. How to build major projects that Indigenous communities support, environmental groups accept, and international buyers trust. In China, he'll discuss LNG supply contracts backed by Indigenous partnership. In Qatar, he'll position Canada as a complementary supplier to Middle Eastern gas, not a competitor. In Davos, he'll present Canada's partnership model as the future of responsible resource development while American extraction politics implode. The contrast writes itself. American energy executives spend January scrambling to understand which regulations will survive the next administration. Canadian officials spend January signing export contracts with Indigenous nations as equity partners. Dear viewers, this is what sovereignty actually looks like in 2025. Not domination of Indigenous communities. Partnership with Indigenous nations. Not extraction despite opposition. Development through collaboration. Now here's the detail most analysis completely missed about coastal First Nations opposition to the oil pipeline. They're not opposing all development. They're opposing specific projects that threaten their marine territories without their partnership. The Ksi Lisims LNG facility. Facing legal challenges from other First Nations, yes. But those challenges are being resolved through Canada's legal system, not through street protest or international campaigns. Why? Because the Nisga'a Nation is a full partner. Because the project includes genuine Indigenous governance. Because coastal communities see economic benefit flowing to their territories instead of through them. When Carney emphasizes projects built sustainably and in partnership in his Prince Rupert discussions, he's not making empty promises. He's describing the only model that actually works in Canada in 2025. The oil pipeline that coastal First Nations say will never happen? They're right. It won't. Because any project that tries to bypass Indigenous partnership in BC will spend the next 15 years in the legal battles, losing value every quarter. The LNG facility with Nisga'a partnership, already moving toward construction, already attracting Asian buyers, already generating the economic returns Alberta and BC need without the legal quagmire. Let's connect this back to Canada's broader strategic position Because this Prince Rupert meeting isn't just about one energy project. Carney inherited a Canada economically dependent on American markets, vulnerable to U.S. political chaos, and struggling to execute major resource projects. 10 months into his mandate, watch what he's built instead. Indigenous partnership model that gives projects legal certainty, Asian export markets that reduce dependence on American buyers, environmental credibility that attracts premium pricing, and diplomatic sophistication that positions Canada as the reliable partner, while American foreign policy lurches between extremes. The pattern repeats across every sector. Canadian critical minerals exports, Indigenous partnered projects, Canadian agricultural sales to Asia, Indigenous communities involved in supply chain decisions, Canadian defense procurement, consultation with northern Indigenous nations on Arctic sovereignty. This isn't political correctness. This is strategic advantage. When Carney meets with coastal First Nations on Tuesday, he's not checking a reconciliation box before his international trip. He's demonstrating to Beijing, Doha, and Davos exactly why Canadian projects deliver what American projects promise. Here's the sequence that should terrify American LNG competitors. March 2025, Carney takes office with a mandate to rebuild Canadian sovereignty. April 2025, Liberals win federal election. November 2025, Carney signs historic MOU with Alberta Premier Smith on energy partnership. And now, just weeks later before his first major Asia trip as Prime Minister, he's in Prince Rupert confirming to coastal First Nations that their concerns about marine protection aren't obstacles to overcome. They're design parameters for Canadian energy policy. The message to Asian LNG buyers: Canada's export capacity is growing with Indigenous partnership backing every project. The message to American competitors: your litigation risks are our competitive advantage. Final detail that reveals everything about where Canadian energy strategy is heading. Asian buyers pay premium prices for supply reliability, not just reliable molecules, reliable contracts that survive political transitions, legal challenges, and environmental reviews. American LNG export facilities offer the lowest prices when they're operating, but factor in delay risk, cancellation probability, and regulatory uncertainty. And suddenly, Canadian LNG with Indigenous partnership backing looks like the better investment. Carney isn't competing on price, he's competing on certainty. An Indigenous partnership is how Canada delivers certainty that American extraction politics can't match. When those coastal First Nations leaders sit down with Carney on Tuesday, they're not meeting with someone asking for permission to develop their territories. They're meeting with a Prime Minister asking how Canada can build energy projects they'll support as partners. That difference, that's what separates resource extraction from resource sovereignty. That's what separates American chaos from Canadian strategy. That's what separates countries that fight Indigenous communities from countries that partner with Indigenous nations. Dear viewers, if you want to understand why Canada is emerging as Asia's preferred energy partner, while American LNG projects collapse in a litigation, watch what happens this week. Carney consults before he commits. He partners before he proceeds. He builds relationships before he signs contracts. That's not weakness, that's statecraft. And Beijing is taking notes.